You've probably heard the old saying, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It means the first generation builds a fortune, the second generation maintains it, and the third completely loses it. And this isn't just a folk tale. It's a quiet curse that follows great wealth across the globe. Studies have shown that a staggering 70% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation, and 90% are broke by the third. This isn't just a run of bad luck. It's not the market's fault. It's a mindset. It's a pattern of decay that starts in the mind long before it hits the bank account. History's wealthiest families didn't just lose their fortunes, they practically announced it to the world, without even realizing what they were saying. They spoke a different language, a vocabulary of decline. There are 5 phrases, 5 seemingly harmless statements, that acted as a verbal death warrant for dynasties like the Vanderbilts, the Goulds, and the great aristocratic houses of Britain. In this video, we'll reveal the words that cost them everything. The Gilded Age. Even the name sounds expensive. It brings to mind railroad tycoons, steel magnates, and shipping barons who commanded fortunes so vast they dwarfed the U.S. Treasury. We're talking about families like the Vanderbilts, whose patriarch Cornelius controlled more money than the entire government. Families like the Goulds, who ran a railroad empire, and the Fricks, who mastered the world of steel. Their lives were a spectacle of excess, sprawling mansions they called summer cottages, parties that could feed a small city, and power that seemed absolute. But underneath all that gold plating, a rot was setting in. The founders, the tough, ruthless, innovative men who built these empires from scratch, understood the brutal work of making money. Their heirs, however, often only understood how to spend it. They inherited the assets but not the ambition, the profits but not the principles. They were born at the finish line and never learned how to run the race. The result was a slow, predictable slide into oblivion. A decline so common, it's almost a formula. And you can hear this formula in the way they spoke, in the phrases they used to justify their decisions, rationalize their laziness, and comfort themselves as the world changed around them. These phrases aren't just words, they're windows into the soul of a dying dynasty. They expose the fatal flaws, arrogance, complacency, fear, and ignorance that brought titans of industry to their knees. We're going to dissect the 5 phrases that time and again have become the epitaph of generational wealth. And we'll start with the one that paralyzed an entire class of rulers. Section 1. This is the way it has always been done. This first phrase sounds wise, doesn't it? It sounds like tradition, stability, the steady hand of experience. But in the mouth of a declining power, it's the anthem of obsolescence. It's the sound of a mind slamming its doors shut to the future. And no group in history chanted this refrain more devotedly, or paid a higher price for it, than the British aristocracy. For centuries, the British nobility's power and wealth seemed unshakable. They were a class that owned roughly half the land in the country. Their income wasn't earned, it was generated, flowing from vast agricultural estates that had been in their families for generations. Rent from tenant farmers was their river of gold, funding their grand houses, their political careers, and their leisurely lives. They didn't need to innovate. The land provided, and the social order, which they controlled, made sure they stayed on top. For them, the way it has always been done, was a magnificent way indeed. But then, in the late 19th century, the world changed. Steamships started crossing the Atlantic faster and cheaper than ever. Refrigeration was getting better. And suddenly, the vast, fertile prairies of the United States and Argentina could produce grain and livestock at a fraction of the cost of an English farm. A tidal wave of cheap corn, beef, and wheat flooded the British market. For the British farmer, it was a catastrophe. For the British aristocrat, it was an existential threat. Agricultural prices plummeted. Tenant farmers went bankrupt or demanded massive rent reductions. The very foundation of aristocratic wealth, the land itself, was cracking. the river of gold slowed to a trickle. Land, once the ultimate asset, became what they called a millstone around the aristocrat's neck. This is the moment where a smart organization pivots. It looks for new investments, new ways to make money. Some did, investing in factories or colonial enterprises. But for a huge portion of the nobility, this was unthinkable. Their identity wasn't just tied to their wealth, it was tied to the source of their wealth. They were landowners. They were not industrialists, bankers, or, God forbid, merchants. To engage in trade was seen as vulgar, a betrayal of their class. So they clung to the old ways, insisting, this is the way it has always been done. As their incomes collapsed, their expenses didn't. An aristocrat had a duty to live like one. That meant maintaining the crumbling ancestral home with its hundreds of rooms and armies of servants. It meant hosting lavish parties and keeping a house in London for the social season. Their lifestyle was a performance, and to stop performing was to admit defeat. Then came the government, which was no longer a friendly club of fellow landowners. To fund a modern state, they needed revenue, and they looked at the great landed estates. In 1894, the government introduced a progressive estate tax, or death duty. When a peer died, his heir had to pay a substantial tax on the entire inheritance. This was devastating. These aristocrats were asset-rich but cash-poor. When a duke died, his son would face a tax bill so huge he'd be forced to sell off pieces of the estate, land, paintings, furniture, just to pay the government. This toxic cocktail of collapsing income, fixed expenses, and crippling taxes created a death spiral. The story of the Dukes of Manchester is a perfect, tragic example. At the end of the 19th century, the family was enormously wealthy. But they were caught in the trap. By 1950, their family seat, Kimbolton Castle, a 50-bedroom behemoth, had to be sold. The money was disastrously invested in a Kenyan farming venture that failed. When the 10th Duke died in 1977, the family fortune had dwindled to just £70,000. His son, Angus Montague, inherited the title in 1985 but little else. His life was a sad string of financial hardships, a man with a grand name and empty pockets. A judge in a fraud trial called him absurdly stupid and negligent, from a fortune that could fund armies to a pathetic £70,000 in just 2 generations. The Dukes of Manchester weren't destroyed by a single bad decision. They were destroyed by a single, paralyzing idea. This is the way it has always been done. It was a lullaby of decline, sung by an entire class as they drifted into irrelevance. Section 2. We must maintain appearances. If the first phrase is about refusing to change, this second one is about speeding up your ruin just to look good. It's the voice of pride fighting a war against basic arithmetic. It's the belief that the illusion of wealth is more important than wealth itself. And it's the mantra that fueled the most spectacular bonfire of cash in American history, a bonfire lit by the heirs of the Vanderbilt family. The founder, Cornelius, the Commodore, Vanderbilt, was the total opposite of this phrase. He was a rough, brutally effective businessman who started with a single ferry boat and a $100 loan from his mom. By his death in 1877, he'd built a railroad and shipping empire worth over $100 million, more money than was in the U.S. Treasury at the time. The Commodore was a builder, not a spender. He viewed the antics of high society with contempt. His descendants, however, saw things differently. They were born with the Vanderbilt name, but they weren't yet respectable. New York's old money elite, the 400, looked down on them as crass new money. For the heirs, especially the ambitious Alva Vanderbilt, this was an insult they couldn't stand. They decided that if they couldn't earn respect, they would buy it. They would force their way into the elite through a campaign of such overwhelming, jaw-dropping spending that the world would have to pay attention. Their guiding principle became, we must maintain appearances. This wasn't just about buying nice things. It was social warfare waged with marble, gold leaf, and French artworks. The Vanderbilts started building a series of mansions on Fifth Avenue, each more grandiose than the last. But the real theater of this war was Newport, Rhode Island. It began with Alva Vanderbilt commissioning Marble House, a summer cottage that was actually a palace of white marble. It cost a staggering $11 million in 1892, with $7 million spent on the marble alone. To celebrate, Alva threw a party so extravagant it's still the high water mark of Gilded Age excess. And it worked. The party was so magnificent that it forced Caroline Astor, the Queen of New York society, to finally pay Alva a formal visit, signaling the Vanderbilts' official acceptance. Victory was theirs. But the cost was astronomical. And the competition was just getting started. Seeing Marble House, Alva's brother-in-law, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, felt he had to do better. He hired the same architect and gave him a simple directive: build something that would put Marble House to shame. The result was the Breakers, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace with 50-foot ceilings and a great hall plated in 23-karat gold leaf. The cost was another $7 million, over $260 million in today's money. And on it went. Another brother built the Biltmore Estate, a 250-room castle in North Carolina. The family's spending became a cycle of one-upmanship. The problem is, this lifestyle, maintaining multiple mansions, yachts, private rail cars, and endless parties, wasn't an investment. It was pure expense. While the Commodore's fortune was built on owning the infrastructure of America, his grandchildren's fortunes were being liquidated to import French chateaux piece by piece. The income from the family's businesses, now split among more and more heirs, simply couldn't keep up. The decline was gradual, then it was fast. By the third generation, interest in actually running the businesses that funded their lifestyle was gone. The great mansions, the very symbols of their social triumph, became financial anchors. By 1947, every single one of the 10 Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue had been demolished. The Breakers and Marble House survived only by being turned into museums. When 120 of the Commodore's descendants gathered for a family reunion in 1973, there wasn't a single millionaire among them. The great Vanderbilt fortune, once the largest in the world, had evaporated in less than a century. It wasn't stolen. It wasn't lost in a stock market crash. It was spent, systematically dismantled in a desperate attempt to maintain appearances. If you're finding these cautionary tales as fascinating as I do, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We dig into stories like this every week, and it's the best way to make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Section 3. Let the professionals handle it. This phrase is the sound of abdication. It's the comfortable whisper that tells an heir they don't need to understand the messy business of managing a fortune. It suggests wealth is a machine that can be handed over to a team of well-paid mechanics. But what heirs often forget is that no one will ever guard your money as jealously as you will. This mindset, a mix of financial ignorance and misplaced trust, was the undoing of the Gould dynasty. The patriarch, Jay Gould, was the polar opposite of this. He was a ruthless and widely hated financier who understood his businesses down to the last dollar. He trusted almost no one. When he died in 1892, he left his children a fortune of $72 million in a tightly controlled trust, designed to protect it. His eldest son, George J. Gould, inherited the empire. He'd been trained by his father, but he lacked his father's obsessive focus and killer instinct. Jay Gould was a professional. George Gould wanted to hire professionals. This played out in two fatal ways. First, he delegated crucial decisions to managers who didn't have the same skin in the game. But more damaging was that when he did make decisions, they were the decisions of an amateur playing at being a tycoon. He poured millions into expanding the family's railroad empire, getting into costly turf wars. He emulated the Vanderbilts, building a massive luxury estate that bled the family trust of capital. He even tried to corner the wheat market, a reckless gamble that his father would have never considered. He failed, losing millions. All the while, the professionals, the lawyers, trustees, and managers, cashed their checks, gave their advice, and watched as the empire crumbled. By the time George Gould died in 1923, a huge portion of the great Gould fortune had been squandered through mismanagement and extravagant living. This abdication of responsibility is a recurring theme. Remember the 12th Duke of Manchester, Angus Montague? He was the perfect example of an heir completely unequipped to manage his own affairs. His own lawyer admitted the Duke was gullible and foolish. He let professionals, in his case, a series of conmen, handle it, and they handled him right into ruin. The lesson from the Goulds and the Manchesters is brutal. Wealth is not a self-perpetuating machine. It's an enterprise that requires constant, vigilant, and knowledgeable leadership. Handing over the keys to professionals without understanding the engine yourself isn't delegation, it's surrender. Section 4. This time is different. These are probably the 4 most dangerous words in investing. They are the siren song of speculation, the anthem of every financial bubble. This phrase is born from arrogance, the belief that you're smarter than the market, and that the old rules of risk no longer apply to you. It's the mindset that turned one of America's most brilliant industrialists, Charles M. Schwab, into a cautionary tale. Schwab wasn't an heir. He was a self-made man of immense talent who started as a laborer in one of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills and rose with meteoric speed. He helped form U.S. Steel, then left and built its rival, Bethlehem Steel, into a powerhouse. He was a genius. At his peak, his personal fortune was estimated at over $200 million. But Schwab was also a gambler. He lived life on a grand scale, with a taste for high-stakes poker and Monte Carlo. And he believed, with every fiber of his being, that for him, this time is different. You could see this belief built in steel and stone. He constructed a 75-room French chateau on the Hudson River called Riverside. It cost $6 million in 1906 and was a declaration of his status, complete with a private chapel, bowling alley, and swimming pool. Andrew Carnegie himself reportedly said, "Have you seen that place of Charlie's? It makes mine look like a shack." The mansion was a symbol of his mindset. He was spending on a scale that assumed his income would grow forever. And for a while, during the Roaring Twenties, it worked. But he was also speculating, plowing his fortune into risky ventures, always believing the next one would be the big one. Then, in 1929, the music stopped. The stock market crashed. For a leveraged speculator like Schwab, it was annihilation. His fortune, built on the soaring value of his stock, evaporated. The man who was once the king of steel was financially ruined. He couldn't even pay the taxes on his beloved mansion. He spent his final years in a small apartment. When Charles M. Schwab died in 1939, his estate was bankrupt. His grand home sat empty for years before being torn down and replaced by an anonymous brick apartment building. The final, bitter irony? If Schwab had been able to hold on for just a few more years, World War II would have brought a massive demand for steel, and his fortune would have been restored. But his belief that the rules didn't apply to him had left him with no cushion for the inevitable downturn. He bet everything on the idea that his time was special, and he lost everything when it turned out it wasn't. Section 5. The money will take care of us. This final phrase is maybe the most insidious of all, because it's spoken with a sigh of contentment. It's the voice of passivity. It's the quiet, comfortable belief that a great fortune is a magical, infinite resource. It's the mindset that transforms a dynamic family enterprise into a static pool of cash, just waiting to be drained. This was the fatal illusion of the descendants of industrial titan Henry Clay Frick, and it stands in stark contrast to the one family that truly broke the generational curse: the Rockefellers. Henry Clay Frick was a ruthless and brilliant industrialist who made an immense fortune in steel. But the fortune he left his descendants lacked a unifying purpose or a structure for its own survival. The family inherited the money, but not a mission for the money. They fell for the oldest aristocratic disease, the belief that the money will take care of us. This mindset leads to a predictable decay. The first generation builds. The second might maintain it. But by the third generation, the cousins consortium, the connection to the founder is distant. The business is just a source of dividends. Heirs have different goals and different lifestyles. Without a central vision, the fortune fragments. The family business gets starved of capital to satisfy the short-term spending of the heirs. This is the path the Frick family fortune followed, a slow decline through mismanagement. This is the essence of the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb. That 90% statistic isn't about markets collapsing, it's about family purpose collapsing. The money, left alone, doesn't take care of anyone. It gets spent, taxed, diluted, and lost. Now, consider the counterexample, the Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, was the wealthiest man in modern history. But he was also a visionary of legacy. He knew his fortune could be a destructive force for his descendants. So he and his son didn't assume the money would take care of the family. They created a system to take care of the money. They did something revolutionary. They professionalized their legacy. They established a family office, a centralized, professionally staffed organization whose only purpose was to manage the family's assets, investments, and philanthropy. This wasn't a trust fund, it was a dynamic, corporate-like entity designed for multi-generational survival. The family office did two crucial things. First, it separated the management of the wealth from the personal finances of individual family members. Second, it channeled the family's efforts towards a shared purpose beyond just being rich, philanthropy. By creating huge, influential foundations, they gave the family, and the fortune, a reason to exist. It turned the Rockefeller name from a symbol of monopoly into a symbol of global public health, science, and the arts. The contrast is stark. The Fricks, Vanderbilts, and Gould saw their wealth as a private good to be consumed. Their unspoken assumption was, the money will take care of us. The Rockefellers saw their wealth as a quasi-public trust to be managed. Their actions said something different. We must take care of the money. That shift in perspective is everything. So there you have them. 5 phrases. 5 mindsets that have wiped out some of the greatest fortunes in history. This is the way it has always been done. The voice of inertia, which destroyed the British aristocracy. We must maintain appearances. The voice of pride, which fueled the Vanderbilt's bonfire of vanity. Let the professionals handle it. The voice of abdication, which let the Gould fortune be squandered. This time is different. The voice of arrogance, which led a genius like Charles Schwab into bankruptcy. And finally, the money will take care of us. The voice of entropy and passivity, the exact opposite of the mindset that allowed the Rockefellers to endure. These aren't just historical curiosities. These phrases echo in boardrooms and family meetings today. They represent timeless failures. Fear of change, obsession with status, lack of engagement, too much pride, and a failure of purpose. The stories of the Goulds and Vanderbilts aren't just about losing money. They're about losing the discipline, innovation, and hunger that created the money in the first place. They are a powerful reminder that a fortune, no matter how great, is a fragile thing. It's not the money that's lost, it's the mindset that is lost first. Which of these mindsets do you still see in the world today? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you want more deep dives into the rise and fall of great fortunes, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please join the conversation in the comments. See you in the next one.